came away with was, let's assess what the process would look like, how much staff time and how much community time it might take. And I would tell you that Lauren has specific training in public information plans, and I can see that on a daily basis in terms of how she approaches website and communication. And staff, Lauren, Jim, and I kind of approach this recognizing this is probably a pretty significant community discussion, or has the potential to be. Similar to smoking ban, LGBT, that kind of level of involvement and feedback. Not to say, obviously, we did both of those. That's not to say that it can't be done, but recognizing that we, I think in the organization's own best interest to have done the preparation and the stakeholder conversations in advance rather than get too far ahead of it and then be reacting to feedback after we made a decision to move forward. So with that, Lauren has quite a bit of information on what a specific information plan might look like for this topic, and then we can kind of wrap up and discuss any questions you have.
Okay. Well, I think Mike makes a great point. There's several people here that kind of help with this conversation. I think I ended up being just chief information wrangler to kind of build this into a PowerPoint for everybody to look at today. Went back and went over the video from your January 14th meeting. At that meeting, item 7.4, you had a question being posed by staff with several options. Basically, would you like to move forward with a public involvement campaign? Would you like to move forward with additional research? Would you like to move forward with implementing this point blank? Or one of them was also a combination thereof. And that is where the body landed. More specifically, in looking at comments and the feedback you gave back, specifically were two big things. If we're going to do something like this, there's some public involvement that needs to happen up front to really get through the details, because there are a lot of different components and a different way to kind of slice this cake. It can be a little different everywhere. And so the first part of this PowerPoint is going to highlight what that public involvement plan would look like. We call them PIPs. And then the second is, then what is it if we were to develop a project in-house to implement something like this? We started asking the critical questions that we would normally do when we have clear direction and we're going to start a project. What do we need to know? How do we do that? How do we look at resources, things like that? And so we've kind of outlined that for you too, so you can get a sense of what this would take. So background and context, just for those who are new to the conversation, just kind of a reminder. And we use background and context too when looking at things like this of, what is its uniqueness? We would be the first city in Kansas to do a ban on single-use plastic bags if we did move forward with this. Being the first is not bad, but it is always a challenge. So I think that would be something to definitely consider. Controversial, this issue has picked up nationwide, and there are very strong opinions on both sides. Complexity, from purely a legal, and this kind of bleeds into that last bullet, from a purely legal perspective, this is very challenging. We have national case law, we have local case law. We don't even have a lot in Kansas yet on this. We have been talking with Clark Mines Linville, and I believe Jim's presented on this, that there are avenues in which we could move forward with this, but it would be challenging. Complexity of, when we start talking about a single-use bag, are we talking then about straws? And are we talking about styrofoam? And we kind of get into a whole category of different types of issues. And do we charge for bags? Are we putting emphasis on paper? There's a variety of different questions that kind of need to be answered, and that's where that level of complexity comes from. It's not just an outright ban. Many places have varying degrees. This is a major project. This is a very large effort to undertake. So public involvement would be critical in this. There's a large stakeholder group. There are multiple methods when you deal with this many stakeholders. How do you get to them, and how do you get valuable and necessary information? And then at different times in the project, right now we're going to talk specifically about a pre-public involvement campaign, an information gathering, kind of helping to shape what could become your legislative criteria for the development of the ban. But you can't just do that and then as you go to draft, not to talk to the public anymore. And then once we implement, that relationship with public involvement has to continue. So it is a measured and paced effort throughout the project. And then because because of the complexity, definitely from a staff perspective, needing some really clear direction. And whether that comes now or it comes after the public involvement plan or that pre-public involvement plan is critical. I mean, Jim and I were kind of noting, even if we were trying to, as we'll see in the PowerPoint, get our hands wrapped around what a project like this would take, there's definitely critical pieces missing that make it hard for us to gauge what that would look like. So that's definitely critical here. And that there's change that can happen quickly in this. You know, we may know something right now or the body gives direction now, but we would definitely build in some critical decision-making points for you. So if you change your mind, the public changes their mind, this can all change quite drastically when you've got something like this. Legal challenges and costs. I think that's the thing that Jim and I were finding pretty interesting as we were looking at different cases and different examples, is it's not something to scare us off, but it is something just to kind of take in as part of that context. There are several lawsuits happening around the country right now, both at local levels and at state level. California, Colorado, New York, South Carolina, Texas. Texas has some of the most recent and very notable examples. I think one of the reasons Texas becomes very notable is several municipalities, large ones and small ones, were like 2 or 3 years into their ban before Laredo ended up at the Texas Supreme Court with a very clear ruling that it was not constitutional in Texas to do these types of bans. Laredo spent $500,000 legal fees alone, just gauging through this. That's not to say what they spent as they developed and drafted. There are a lot of challenges there.
If I could jump in, not to say that we will end up in court, but as we draft, we will bear that in mind. I mean, you've seen how we try to approach things in general. Something as high profile as this, Clark Meisman has been involved so far and tried to provide analysis, but there'll be quite a bit of detail applied to anything that we draft, so hopefully it'll uphold scrutiny. And this is just purely speculation on my part, but I think being the person in Kansas has the likelihood of being perceived by the opponents as kind of being the front line in Kansas that needs to be contested to prevent it from getting a foothold in this state. So I think we will probably come at it from the expectation that we're going to have to defend our position and be prepared to do so.
Mike, I know that Clark Mines Windmill has already done a lot of research because they prepared a memorandum for us already kind of to summarize various efforts. Do we have any sense of what legal costs we've incurred to date just doing that research?
Yeah, and the research they've done so far has primarily been just kind of topical, what are the standards, but one of the questions they put to you as a group was how do we meet, we've identified these criteria, but then what arguments do we want to make to meet them? So I don't think we've got much invested at the moment in terms of legal work, maybe 8 hours or so, but as we draft and have to be prepared to defend whatever we come up with, I think it'll be much more.
Well, I think the other part of this slide is looking at typical legal claims. A lot of times when we're dealing with something like this that's highly legally contentious, there's usually kind of one area. We need to make sure we don't do this. Or we have other types of examples on the books, being first in the state and having numerous ways in which, kind of the legal defense is going to have to come. It's kind of an ever-evolving thing and definitely having to be more on our toes because we're not just looking at another example somewhere. We're having to look at other examples plus try and figure out how that works here in Kansas.
And one of the Kansas unique things that Clark Meisman has identified is fee structure and where that revenue goes and whether it's a tax and how that holds up. So if there was going to be some offsetting fee to try to address some of the retailers' concerns, we'd have to.
Oh, you mean like if we charge for plastic bags or something? Okay.
Or charge for paper bags.
I mean, yeah, okay.
Would you anticipate us getting outside counsel due to the complexity and the specific nature of this?
It hasn't come up yet, but.
I did identify that in the project budget in the back.
Well, he's talking about outside legal counsel?
Yeah, like a specialist who
Yeah.
specializes and has
Yeah.
done this. I don't think that's completely out of the question. I mean, we would do that if we were, there are lots of things when somebody's got a specialty and we're kind of new to the field, or I don't think that's completely out of the question.
Yeah, I agree, it's a possibility.
Well, and a lot of these things, we're talking about, and I want you to know, one of the big discussions the three of us had on Friday is we just want to give you good baseline information up front of, these are a lot of things that we discuss in the office before we kind of leap into these things, and this one's a doozy. I mean, it can have huge impact, but it's definitely a unique project. So I think this is a great map. Preemption on ban the ban. So what you'll see is this is kind of an interesting take on the map of the lower continental United States. So these little shapes represent those different states, and you'll see, do I have a pointer on these?
It's real faint.
Yeah, you'll see there we are with Missouri, Arkansas, New Mexico, Nebraska. So, and what I like about this map is the map key, and you'll see in the handouts, it really gets into kind of the varying shades of how this is handled. You know, there's an outright ban, it's banning the ban, there's local ones but not a state one. There are those states that have it, you know, maybe at their legislative level at this moment. So there's a lot of different things happening throughout the country right now on this issue. I did just grab our most neighbors and where they're at. Colorado has adopted and implemented a local laws, but preemption is alleged, and an anti-preemption bill is pending. Nebraska has nothing on the books currently. Missouri has preemption adopted, meaning when we say preemption, it's a ban the ban. Oklahoma, recent threats of state preemption, and Iowa has state preemption adopted.
So, as I mentioned, we kind of broke this information into two parts. One is public involvement. So the idea is how to provide an outline of information, data, and opinions that can be gathered from businesses and the public regarding a plastic bag ban before initiating any legislation. So we always start with purpose and objective. What is it we're trying to do with this campaign, with this outreach effort? So one is always identifying stakeholders. And I think in this, what's really critical is how we get information back, getting it back from all the relevant parties so that you have good data to make decisions as we go forward if we were to do a ban. Stakeholders, this is a fairly large group, and I think one of the challenging things is also being first in the state. You're not really knowing like who's gonna play, and I'm gonna be probably stepping on something here, but Kansas isn't known for being a normally like environmentally forward state. Like in California, you would know like these are the lobbyist groups that are going to come forward, and you may know that on a regional level. That's not as obvious here, so we can try and make some good guesses on who's going to come and want to be a part of this and research and invite them, but I'm sure there's some we're going to miss. So as a public involvement person, that always makes me a little nervous because a good stakeholder identification up front can save you a lot of pain in the end. Nobody likes to be forgotten. I think businesses are a really unique one in this. You can't just say all businesses, because they're all going to be a little different. We're going to kind of get into why we look at them a little differently. But mega corporate, parent companies versus the farmer's market kind of person versus, you know, our businesses downtown. They're all using these single-use plastic bags, but where that's going to impact them, whether it's how they change their computer systems or buying supplies or having to charge people, it's a lot of different things and how they're going to be affected by a ban. Internal, I mean, this is actually an issue that can touch many different departments within the city and what it takes to keep everybody in the know. And then there are definitely outside governmental entities, Salina County, KDHE, and other environmental components. This is just, for those that like graphics, we just made a cluster chart to just kind of understand, you know, how quickly, I mean, a list is one thing, but this starts to help you understand how these groups branch off. So many years of public involvement, I'm awfully partial to IAP too. So this is both a learning opportunity and a sharing opportunity. From the municipal perspective, probably the best methodology, I think, out there. It's very thorough, very common sense, but one of the things that I think is important in IAP2, which is International Association of Public Participation, is you can't just treat all stakeholders equal. And that's not that they're valued less, but just sending out a postcard is not, that's not what the business is needed. And all all parties, all stakeholders make assumptions, right? So we talk about kind of the 1 through 5 perspective, with 1 to 0 being like, we're here to inform. 5 being full on vote. Most people go right to 5. And sometimes in government, that's not always where we're at when we're sharing information. And some stakeholders are maybe at a 3 or 4. Others are at a 1. So you kind of have to gauge so that you get expectations right so people aren't disappointed. And that the information you get from the stakeholders is useful to decision makers. So in this case, this is, and you can see here, and this is just a good slide for reference points too, of when we look at different techniques for different levels of involvement as well. So I love this matrix as well, and this is something we almost always do in the office when we start looking at public involvement, is interest and influence. Some groups are just going to have a greater level of interest, and some will just have a greater level of influence. And so it's important to understand that as we do public involvement, to make sure that we are touching those points. One of the things I try to share with people too on public involvement, you have a window, and if you create distrust or you miss somebody, it is so hard to get that back. So doing it well up front and strategically is very helpful. So typically, we first establish routine communication. So as far as a project like this, we would look to social media, the city's website, local newspaper, established email, mailing lists. We have that wonderful opportunity here at the city, so if you want to get on something and stay informed, you just click the box. We can provide regular board and commission reports, just something standardized, kind of basic memo that went to relative boards and commissions that could be affected by this. And then we have some great localized talk radio shows that are wonderful at getting information out in a different method. So those could all be used and would be used throughout this. So project-specific activities. As I mentioned before, website, creating a base page. Press releases, surveys are great for taking in data. It's not the only way to get data though. Interviews, listening sessions, stakeholder group meetings, data analysis, and then developing a report. And I'm kind of running through this quickly because I've broken these down into a timeline. So this roughly comes out to 6 months. Month 1 is really setting up shop. You create your basic web page. This is something similar that I did for the Downtown Arts and Entertainment Ordinance. Let viewers know, like, what is the objective of this, general scope and purpose, when are critical meeting dates, and here's where we'll be posting additional documentation for you to go to visit, review, and of course there would be a link to the survey. It would also be very logical for us to put out a press release. When we were looking at examples, Austin, we actually happened to come across the city of Austin's press release when they did their public involvement pre-campaign. By the way, that was $250,000. So, and it took them a year. So we're down to 6 months. And we probably could be a little shorter, but I am thinking of workload. But you're wanting to let the public know, we're doing this, where can you find information, how can you get more, and how can you participate? And then developing a digital survey. Something that could be running in the background of all of this, but be a consistent tool that was used. Because remember, people, some people are going to come to the meeting and they really like that opportunity to speak. Some people are going to, want to come in writing. Some people would rather call in. It was really interesting at the National Planning Conference. Went to a lot of different sessions. One of them on a Parks and Rec plan, and they had contracted with Code for America and done a phone number on temporary signs that people would just call in and leave comments. So there's a lot of different ways in which people can participate, but you want to give them consistent options. Stakeholder interviews. So this is when we start talking about, like, different stakeholders need different things. Critical to this as far as influence or power and level of interest is the business community, because they're going to be hit hardest with how do I change my computer system if you're charging for something, and is there a tax, and all these kinds of things. If I don't have bags, what else do we give people? How long would it take to get into this? Is it just the plastic bags? Is it straws? Is it, there's going to be a lot of questions. So with that level of detail, and I think wanting to understand some of the financial implications, the time that they would need to come into compliance like this, that rather than doing a survey, that in this case, it's quite customary to do interviews. We would have a couple members of staff go, sit down with them, some standardized questions, and really get into the meat and potatoes of how does this affect these types of businesses. These would ideally summarize into a case study. So when we produce the report at the end of the public involvement plan for you, you would have these case studies to look over and see. Generally one page, double-sided, but good relative information. Moving into month 3, this is when we do some general listening sessions. These are different than a town hall or just a generic public meeting. The listening sessions are really about listening. They're light on the presentation. There's a bit of information up front just to give everybody the same level of basic content. And then we would do some kind of group exercise, really based on kind of answering critical questions. It'd be different than the survey, but again, kind of still trying to answer the same questions, just getting it differently. I would also recommend that these types of things, that usually 1 to 2 city commissioners would be there, because it is about listening. So being there to kind of hear firsthand how those things are going. We, of course, would be recording notes and things from those meetings, and as an outcome of that, you would have a summary of how that meeting went, the results of that meeting. I would probably estimate 2 to 4 of those, kind of different places, different times in town, so there's really no reason somebody couldn't have made it if they wanted to be there. Month 4, these are our stakeholder group meetings. And I think what's kind of critical about these is you may be thinking, well, Lauren, you did these business interviews, and then you did these listening sessions. Man, if you aren't one of the, I mean, you should have been to something by now. But some people want to talk through their group. You know, you may have certain chamber members who weren't on the interview group. They're not going to go as an individual citizen, but they're paying membership dues for the chamber to be there and represent them, maybe some of their other chamber members to have that conversation, or SDI, or, I mean, we can kind of go through this list. So certain groups need and want to talk through their stakeholder group, and it's important to value those groups. So trying to recognize those and give an opportunity. So there would be a summary of the feedback from those added to your final report. Month 5 and 6 are really about
taking in all the data, taking in all the reports that came from those outreach activities, compiling them into a meaningful way so you guys can look at that data, and then presenting that to you in a report in month 6. Probably something similar like this in a study session, and I would hope that that then got published on the website too. Even if you chose not to go forward with it, we'd probably keep it living on the website for a while, so as people came back to it, they'd at least know those efforts, and we'd keep that transparency going. So, in summary, complex issues with multiple views, unknown impacts of a ban, major legal challenges, city commission needing data and how to decide. We use those kinds of parameters to design this PIP in order to meet those needs. I just happened to be at the National Planning Conference where I know several consultants who do this type of work, and I had a table that I was working from before we jumped into a PowerPoint, and I just slid across the table and was like, nothing formal, but this is what I need. How much does that cost? Because I kind of did our hourlies to kind of see if we were on, and I was told most explicitly that 50 to 75,000 range is a very real number. You can probably save a little here or there, but also on something like this, it's not abnormal. You know, it's always fingers crossed. If you do your planning up front, you should be able to stay on schedule, but sometimes certain things hit a note, you may need one extra meeting. And there's things we can consolidate as far as like travel and, you know, trying to get a lot of trips in at one time. But realistically, hour-wise, this is a $50,000 to $75,000 effort. And as I mentioned, I mean, Austin, I know they're a much bigger city, but $250,000 to do theirs. And I think a reality is, if we did this in-house without a consultant, then we're gonna have something's gotta give.
So, priority-wise, what do we need to put on hold, or where would we build this in time-wise? So, now that we have all this data, you may be wondering, well, what would it take to do this whole thing if we did that? So, we just basically kind of went through and tried to answer the questions in the sections that we have in a standardized project management plan. So, I think project charters are critical. I use this with my own staff. If somebody comes in and they're like, I have the best idea, I'm like, great, fill out one of these, because that means you've got enough information for us to really move forward. So again, purpose and intent. What are we hoping to accomplish? So I think Jim did a really good job of trying to kind of pull this together. From what we've heard from you guys is a goal to reduce the usage of single-use plastic bags due to environmental impacts, cost of cleanup, reduction in general pollution as defined by the City Commission. This is kind of a moving target, but that's, at this point, where we're at. Problem definition. What is the problem we are intending to solve? I think at this point, one of the challenges was, is there a particular data source that we're pointing to? Is there a particular instance that has maybe brought this to the forefront? So if we were to move forward, that's something staff would need some more feedback on, of just why this. And this is usually where kind of a lot of the good discussion can have, because if it's one of the questions we've been kind of struggling with, is it just the single plastic bags? Is it certain types of litter? What is this? Well, if the problem definition starts to say it's litter in general, then do we need to look at something broader than plastic bags? So those are some of the questions that can then reflect on the purpose intent. Does that make sense? So this is kind of lengthy, but I always kind of consider this another part of the litmus test in a project charter. For me, is business objectives. That's when we start looking at documents you, City Commission, have adopted, because those are the objectives of us, the city, the business. So things that are in the comprehensive plan, things that are in the strategic plan, your legislative agenda. If you have a plan you adopted that's specific to a topic, like if we were talking about housing, I'd probably refer to the Salina plan or the Parks and Rec plan for that. So we would take all those types of documents you've already made clear choices and decisions about. So in the strategic plan, you do have verbiage that supports us from a business objective of looking at environmental consequences and trying to balance those as the community grows, preserving natural assets. And goal number 7 does have the city recognizing the importance of a healthy community and its natural resources and making practical efforts to preserve them. The comp plan talks about growth, development, and redevelopment that is fiscally responsible, environmentally sensitive, suitable and efficient, and supported by quality municipal services. I did not find anything specific on the legislative agenda, but really these are the 3 documents that are these kind of foundational documents adopted by you that could speak to this. Project objectives, these are a little hard at this point because without knowing what is it we're after, so these are fairly broad. So I wouldn't stake my bacon on these, but I tried to be as inclusive as I could based on where we're at right now. So implementation, I will tell you probably of all the slides, this is probably where we have the most questions, because without really knowing what the draft would look like or the ordinance would look like, it's hard to know what implementation will look like. I will tell you though, this is also probably one of the hardest parts of this project. I mean, just the staffing, how do you plan on enforcing? If people don't do what they're supposed to, what are the ramifications for that enforcement? How do we collect these fees? What do we do with the fees? There is going to have to be significant notification, outreach, and education. I mean, if not equal to what we did in the beginning, probably maybe even a little more, because there are some very specific things you're going to need people to do.
And if I can touch on the fees a little bit, that may seem, we didn't bring fees into the conversation. From what we've seen in terms of the reading, it's a function of trying to give the businesses an opportunity to recover their cost. I don't know, from what we've already seen, I don't know that we could impose a fee and then collect that fee to the city as much as it's in anticipation of responding to retailers that are upset by added costs.
And I think that's one thing we talked about before. I mean, I didn't want to see any anticipated fees at all.
Right, and
we
that's not
talked
to say that they
about
are.
low-income families, we talked about different things
Right.
like that. And, I mean, and then getting back to some of the other, I mean, we're not talking about plastic straws, we're talking about single-use plastic grocery sacks that is used by grocery stores, convenience stores, restaurants, department stores. It's a single-use trash bag or single-use plastic bag.
Right. But, and we understand that's kind of where the conversation started. Our concern is you got motivated parties on both sides of the issue that may take us in other directions as we do, as we do the stakeholder process. And
But, I mean, that's something we could, you look at down the road. I mean, it's just like California. They started out with a plastic bag ban, and now they're into plastic straw ban, and now they're into getting ready to do the single plastic bottles. I mean, the bottle ban now. I mean, you can't do everything at one time. We got to start taking baby steps, and I think the baby steps is what we need to take to start this. I mean, I'll get into it in a second, but, some of the things that I found out about how many exactly, or not exactly, how many plastic bags that, in a year's time, that, just the city of Salina and, the neighboring communities are using it's astounding. I cannot believe how many. And that's just, that's not the ones being brought in from, when they go to Wichita to do their shopping or they go someplace else to do their shopping. I mean, that even adds more to it.
And we're not saying that's where it ends up. What our point is, that's where the conversation, if we, get feedback from both sides of the issue, these are the kind of things that are gonna come into the conversation and come back to you to ultimately decide on.
Well, we appreciate that, feedback. And I think one of the reasons it's come up is just when we've done research and looking at other examples, that's kind of where that dialogue is leading, is this about the bags? Is it about more than that? So, and it seems to change a lot too, like with states that have a lot of remote rural areas, with states that have water bodies and things like that, of how that conversation goes. And I think our hope was just to put that in front of you and get that kind of direction, so I hear you.
And it is more than just the bag. I mean, it's not just the bag, it's the, the environmental impact on it. It's just, there's a whole lot more than just the bag itself.
Yeah. So, I threw this slide up here just to kind of throw these things out. As staff, these are some of the things that we think of, and I think they're realistic when you're making a decision like this, is projects become more complicated based on certain things. Assumptions, constraints, dependencies, and risk. And we look at these things to one, kind of gauge complications. When you have a lot of dependencies, for instance, that's a relationship-based thing. So if this body makes this decision, or this group decides this, it can tumble the whole project. I think a lot of this one is dealing with assumptions and dealing with risk, because we have a legal environment we've never seen before. So as a project manager, to not recognize that those have inherent risk is hard to ignore. And the assumptions is, it's easy to make assumptions when you've never had to do something like this before, and especially you're the first. So there's no other real in-state issues to look at. Again, not a reason to say no.
But they do present project challenges for sure. So resources. Realistically, and just kind of looking at this and trying to kind of build timelines, project duration, I would estimate 12 to 24 months. By the time, and the amount of other work we would have to displace. Things are gonna have to go on hold, and not just for a public involvement plan, but as we go down, this is an extensive effort. You're gonna have people from Public Works involved, you're gonna have Community and Development Services, you're gonna have the City Manager's Office involved. And then the question is consulting. This is not, even if we had a consultant for something like this, you still have to have a PM on staff who keeps that relationship. You're still gonna have to have subject matter experts in the organization who probably attend some of these meetings, meet and inform the consultants. So you have work on this side. We've just managed to put some of it out. So we would still see an effect. And you may even, if we did it in-house, still need to reach out for some expertise and things like specialty legal services, graphic design, things like that. And how does this come at a cost? Are we paying for consultants, legal assistants, public outreach? There's a number of things there. And lastly is just political capital. Deciding as a body, is this something we want to move forward with, and what does that mean for you? And I just broke this down a little bit into tasks and milestones. So your initial public outreach campaign, roughly 6 months. We talked about that pretty in depth. Legislative drafting, I give you 3 to 6 months. You're gonna need to draft research, do development, legal review and challenges, public comment period, and city commission action. So normally the way these kinds of things work is we would meet with Clark Mines Linville. If we needed a specialty attorney, that may have to become involved. And we just start looking at other example codes, what pieces need to be there. Then staff reviews, they review, we go back and forth for a bit. Probably bring that to you if you're like, yes, this is our draft, because it's not like we have a sub body that would do that. Then we put that out, probably give it 30 days for you to get feedback from the public, take that in, probably tweak that draft a bit, and then bring it back to you. And then ban implementation, you're looking at another 6 to 12 months. You know, the implementation part has quite a few moving pieces, so you're gonna have to give that time, whether you want a sunset or sunrise clause on that, of giving them a certain amount of time to come into compliance. I think the other thing is data collection. Is this making a difference? So that comes usually with problem definition. Are we fixing our problem? So if we're asking for data to be collected and reported, how would we do that? What does that look like? And then again, significant education and marketing to get everybody on board and in compliance. And then just lastly, staff, number of hours. I just kind of took a stab at that. If we were out of house, we talked about what we know now is the public involvement piece and where we may spend a little money for supplies, room reservations, and things like that. And this slide, I should have titled better, I'm sorry, was very much about the public involvement component. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. So, with all of that, I will definitely stop talking now. But I think when Mike, Jim and I met Friday night, these were some of the questions that we were hoping you could help us answer in just moving forward. And you know, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What is the problem that we are trying to solve? How does this effort compare to other city priorities? And are we committed to moving forward? With that, I'm done. Thank you.
I just have one question. Is this something that we have manpower and expertise in-house already, or is this something like I believe the river is being contracted with Wichita State? Some project that we contract.
Well, we contract with the Docking Institute for recycling survey, but it was more the survey component. The river project, we can contract with the consultant that kind of did that front end process, but that fee was about $400,000, and it was private funding was contributed to that.
So is it easy, or is this something you want to have hands-on control over, in that it might end up as potential legislation, or you want to control it from the get-go? Or
there's definitely going to be a staff involvement component, even if it were sent to a consultant. They could provide some of the social media website development, but they're still going to run all those drafts and proofs by us, or we just authorize them to act on our behalf. They can do a lot of the work, but we'll still be in on the decision making and the vetting, that type of thing. So I don't know, might cut staff time in half.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm not sure. I would definitely, there are certain projects that would have to go on the back burner. It's,
What would you, and first of all, I just want to say, this is great, and it gives me a much better understanding about the time commitment that even with outside involvement, it's going to require from multiple departments. What are some of the projects that, you know, immediately come to mind? And of course, I realize we have to discuss those, but some of the things that you're just like, oh, I'm not going to have time to take a look at that. I mean, are we talking about
We
like?
had that conversation, go ahead.
I mean, there,
You've got so many things,
yeah, the first thing is, just the downtown arts and entertainment ordinance.
right?
That has a lot, between arts and humanities and our department, we've got a lot in that, and I'm PMing that project.
Okay.
There's really nobody in my office that I could assign this to, just because of what we've got on our plates. I think there's some initiatives we've talked about in affordable housing, some of those discussed in executive session that would definitely not happen this year based on, the application cycle for grants and things. Yeah, it definitely takes a priority off of things we've been looking at for affordable housing, of kind of having to set those aside, and it's an hourly, there's just not enough hours in the day, and
The one big one that I know myself and my department wouldn't be able to work on if we were working on this is the stormwater utility, which is something that the city's wanted for the last couple of years. And it's the kind of situation where we've got ongoing maintenance on our levee system, and we've postponed a lot of maintenance on curb repair around town, let alone the storm sewer system, which we don't have a proactive replacement program like Martha does on her water lines. Our storm sewer lines are fix them when they break. So we've got a lot of needs out there, and that is going to be another big investment for the city that I think we need to move forward with. But if we're working on this, I won't be able to work on that. So.
I think if you ask me, we probably need a consultant, because we're gonna need somebody to carry the water, but we're definitely not off the hook, because there's still a level, and on something like this that has a political component to it, you have to have staff active, because they're gonna know their community best. It doesn't matter what consultant.
Stakeholder identification, and I want to back up a step. I mean, admittedly, this is a more detailed approach than we might apply on any given Monday to an ordinance or, a public notice process for zoning as an example. But we've definitely taken the approach that this is more high profile. It's more likely to engender more reaction on both sides of the issue, and just from my experience as well as theirs, it's probably in the organization's best interest and the governing body's best interest to do this up front rather than, you can tell us today, draft the ordinance and bring it back, and we can make a run at it and be respond to the feedback.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, I mean, I want to acknowledge that we deliberately offered this up in light of what we think the significance of the conversation is going to be.
And our job is to take your direction, so I'm not trying to make this look more difficult than it needs to be, but if you ask me up front, how would you build this? I think we found these to be very reasonable steps, and when we looked at other municipalities and where they've had hiccups or falls, this is things they would have changed. And a lot of times, if we don't consider these, we end up having to still do it anyways, and we're often on the back end of it, so this is just looking more proactively at it.
Well, it's just the tip of the iceberg that there are a couple of these segments that, like the exemptions. Are you going to include the bags that you put your grapes and your tomatoes in at the grocery store?
That's not a grocery bag.
A lot of folks have exemptions for that. If you charge for paper bags, then there's a whole conversation. What about the bag you get your prescriptions in? That's a paper bag. So there's that whole exemption. What are you going to provide exemptions for is a big process. Well, that's another one of the processes. What is a reusable bag? I've done hours and hours of research on this, and plastic bags, and there's reusable plastic bags. Well, California's got it to the point that the definition of a reusable bag is one that can be reused 125 times. Well, to prove that, you have to get your bags certified by a company that tests them. So there's layer and layer on that onion that you keep pulling it back as far as defining and certifying what a reusable bag is in California. So it's kind of ominous when you look at that.
And to put this in perspective, take a look at, I know that several weeks ago that Lynchburg had their study session. And they were talking, to the local grocery store there. That local grocery store, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the local grocery store said that during a year's time that they will purchase over 900,000 plastic bags. Now that's just a small grocery store in Lynchburg. That doesn't count the the Dollar General store there and the convenience store that they have down there. Then you move into Salina and you look at all of the grocery stores we got in Salina. I mean, if they're buying 900,000 plastic bags, the size population we've got, and with Walmart, we're talking 60 to 70 million plastic bags a year being purchased just in the city of Salina, not in counting, or used in the city of Salina, not counting what is being brought in from shopping trips and things like that. I mean, you know, that number's mind-blowing when you think 60 to 70,000 bags. I know that there's other projects out there, but is this project not as important as some of the other projects we got? It's an environmental issue. And just in the Sunday paper, they had a really good article. You see it on the internet all the time where where they've got the waterways. I mean, I think Jane can probably tell us right now, when they go to clean up down around the river down there, I bet there's a lot of plastic bags down there. Look at the plastic bags out at the landfill. I mean, you know, that's not Christmas decorations on that fence. That's a lot of plastic bags that they go out there and clean off of that and spend hours cleaning off them out there. We have a big windstorm in town, and they're everywhere. I mean, I know there's a lot of important stuff to do out there, but I think this is just as important as any of the other stuff we've got too.
One thing for sure, I think we'll always have new projects come down the road. Is this something that a city might hire a consultant for a 2-year period? I mean, they still have to work with staff, but
Yeah, I mean, that's
it's
totally doable. And I don't think any of us are saying, we look to you for our priorities. So if this is that priority and that's what you guys decide, I mean, we've told you, we can make this happen.
Oh, and I
So-
appreciate that. I mean, you know, you guys put a lot of time in it, and I really do appreciate that, and I know what you're trying to say.
And there are a lot of challenges out there, but we're happy to take on the ones that you guys identified for sure. And yes, a consultant is a realistic option.
Well, I too appreciate your work on all this, because the correctness of it appeals to me. It's the right thing to do, but as a commissioner, and really put in a position to balances our resources, and we have a lot of things on the table, so for me, I just think there's too much logistics involved to make a statement, be the first one in Kansas to do it. I've been enough other places to see that we aren't the biggest polluters in the world, that and none of the United States is, for that matter, when you get outside the confines of our country. So I hate to say stop at this point and wait, but I just don't think this is the time, for me at least. So I'm on the not moving forward.
and I don't know if we have to necessarily make a decision today, but we might go through this and be unsuccessful here, but provide the knowledge and expertise for the next city to do it right. Look what happened with the tobacco, clean indoor air. I mean, it was a very, it was not a straight up the ladder climb. Each city improved on the previous city's ordinance, and before you know it, I mean, you have some pretty clean ordinances. But look how rack sample our first ordinance was here. You know, we'd separate bars from restaurants and certain hours of the day. I mean, people wouldn't even be dignified by laughing at it now. But it was a start. I think our generation probably thinks that this planet is a little bigger than our kids and grandkids. If you look at that stuff in the ocean, it hadn't affected us yet because we're going to probably die before all that food gets used up. I mean, well, you're young, but I won't single anybody out, but you know who you are. But there's enough for the next 30 years probably. But there's going to be some problems down the road. I mean, this stuff in the ocean, whether you believe we went to the moon or not, the stuff in the ocean is real. And we're one little city as far from the ocean as you can possibly get in the United States of America. Gotta start somewhere. Like there was, and again, we've always focused on recycle. fact, this article has a nice little one. You have the reduce, reuse, recycle, but it has refuse. And this is in the Parade magazine yesterday. But, you know, the way you really stop bad stuff from coming in, don't buy it. Now you'd say, okay, Bristol Myers, we're not gonna buy any of your deodorant if you put it in a certain type of plastic thing. They could cancel our market, their stock ain't gonna go down one bit. But, again, somebody's gotta start. There's some interesting stories in here that what you can do even just on an educational basis, family by family. I mean, I think one outcome of this could be, you know, we may do in 17,000 homes, you know, what we can't do legislatively, but just teach people what the options are.
Well, I think that's one of the options that Jim's presented in the past is, you know, do you need a ban or do we educate? I mean, we've seen other communities that do that, that do a massive educational campaign on the issue. So.
Or invest. The other option that you can invest in reusable bags and make them available to people.
I would say that looking at the historical inertia of people in this country, you know, it's like kids with deadlines before papers day. You have to provide some consequence for that action, or steer their behavior. And then what becomes the second nature now, but they wouldn't even think about it years from now. I mean, kids who grow up in places where there's no smoking doors, where there's no plastic, where there's recycling, I mean, they can't imagine why we haven't caught up with them.
I think Lauren stated it well. It's your authority and your discretion to set the priorities. Not to say that it can't be done. It would be a daunting task. City attorney's office, city manager's office, and staff, with or without a consultant. But if that's a priority, we'll certainly follow your direction.
I can only give you my unscientific terms study of people who come up to me unsolicited, who give their opinion. At the new Rotary Club today, 5 people did come up to me and talk. One lady didn't like it because she didn't have time to carry these reusable bags with her. The other 4 were very much in support. But that's 5 people out of 50,000.
I was trying to figure out a good time to insert this. I had one person approach me as well, and they threw something at me I hadn't thought about, but they expressed a concern about bed bugs and transporting bed bugs from homes that are reusing bags to the store. So I assured them I would pass that concern along.
Well, in full disclosure, the lice and bed bug problem at the library was due to the bags that they sent the books home with the kids. That's how they were getting into the library. When they got rid of the bags, the bugs didn't appear.
Well, there is a strong advocacy for if you discourage plastic bags, it's, I don't know, 60, 70 million, that's probably light. There's millions, if not billions, of bags in Kansas and in the country right now. But the advantage of plastic is if you use paper, just think of how many trees that is. So that's why they charge for paper, is to discourage it, because there's as far as the carbon footprint of using paper bags instead of plastic bags is significant as well. So you're trying to discourage just single-use bag use if you're really concerned about the environment.
Well, Walmart and Kroger have both corporately acknowledged that they'll be going to no bags by, what was it,
2025.
Yeah, I think Walmart's on the same timeline. So the big corporate grocery giants have noticed.
Did they say what they were gonna do? What they were gonna use? Were they gonna use paper? Were they gonna require?
Not that I know, I mean, we could probably dig a little bit, but 2025 is their date.
2025. I guess my concern, and I knew about Kroger, I wasn't sure about Walmart, but the cost to implement this, where our 2 biggest users in Salina County would be doing it in 2025. I'm not sure it's worth the cost and the expense, and even the opportunity that we're gonna have legal counsel to help implement, but also to defend, being the first one in the state of Kansas. I would be surprised that didn't happen. I'm a little bit with Commissioner Ryan. I think we've got significant projects that we need to be addressing. Housing being one of them, some other things that are out there. I guess I'm gonna disagree with Commissioner Hay when he said we need to do a baby step. I don't see a plastic Band-Aid being a baby step. I mean, that's a major endeavor for this community. I still think it's kind of like recycling. I think we need to educate and continue to educate as much as possible the benefits to not using plastic bags. I would be for this project if we were looking for a project to do and if we were flush with cash. But right now, I just don't see us being in the position to address this at this time.
No, I think the only expenditure on this is in this phase, because the cost is not gonna be borne by us, by the city. The cost, living example, when was the last time you got a plastic bag at Sam's Club? You never have, because they don't have them. But,
Well, the
which
cost
parking lot
is
is,
to implement it.
but it's not, we don't implement it.
Well, we will
Retail,
still.
well, I mean, we implement it, but I mean, the cost of the replacement is not on us.
Granted.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be an enforcement component to it.
Right,
I don't know that
enforcement.
that'll be a dedicated staff person, but there'll be, something that we follow, well, education as we implement, and then follow up to ensure compliance. It's probably the ongoing expense of the city.
Well, something that Lauren's presentation really brought out is, everything, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and, we're gonna have, you look at our budget and you're like, oh, maybe $50,000 or $75,000 isn't that much of an investment, but we are talking about investment staff time, which means that there are things that we've expressed are important in the past that we're not going to be able to go through with that, and what ultimately, would have a bigger impact on the lives of the people in the community, being able to proceed with some of these, the land bank or the low housing, or the affordable housing initiatives or things like that, or this. And the one opportunity that I could see to maybe take a baby step, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny baby step, but Commissioner Hay by saying baby steps, and then Mike by mentioning the LGBTQ protections that we've put in place within the city, is maybe that's something that we need to look at just internally. I don't know how many plastic bags that we use within our organization in terms of, I don't know if Parks and Rec has things that, I don't think the Smoky Hill Museum uses plastic bags, but I mean, maybe we start within our organization philosophically and lead that way, and kind of see how the marketplace takes care of this issue, because I'm just not ready to give up on, things like the affordable housing initiatives. I think Jim made a great point about the stormwater utility, maintenance plan.
Economic development. You've been
Oh.
tasked with,
Oh, yeah, whoops, and I went to that, so I should have, economic development, yeah, so.
And it's something that kind of occurred to me as we were doing the comp plan. I know you guys just did your strategic planning effort, and we are like just 1 or 2 years away from being due for revising our comprehensive plan. This is often an environmental issue, and we've made some great steps in our recycling center. And if we did something like this, I guess, like, does that become kind of a pillar priority for the community, of being an environmental leader in the state of Kansas? And if so, we just need to kind of think about that as we go forward. Baby step in the bags, but like usually it's a kind of an effort you build on, because this is a deep hole with lots of things if we're thinking about our future and our kids and the planet. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, and are those things that you want to build in as more priorities? And the comp plan and strategic priorities and things like that are places for you to build that in, and it helps staff to kind of know ahead of time as we're looking at things. How do we make those connections for you?
Now, we don't accept plastic bags at the recycling center, right?
We do not.
Can we?
we don't have a place to take them.
Where does Dillon's take them? Because they collect them, correct?
It must be a closed loop system. I can talk to the manager and see
They
if I
won't tell
can
you, 'cause
find
that's
out.
right. They said it's
Generally,
proprietary.
they don't wanna talk about that.
Walmart and Target would not tell us what they do with them.
Probably.
But again,
Put a tracer on it and just follow.
Yes, it's being
NCIS or
You
something.
probably know,
Always television.
you probably know more about it than I do, but the conversation about biodegradable bags is that they're not well thought of either. They just flake and they don't actually biodegrade, they just break into small pieces.
Yeah, well, that's no whole other certification process as far as what is considered biodegradable and what is allowed and what's not allowed. There's varying degrees or shades of gray there too, so.
Well, they don't degrade, you just can't see the flakes.
Right.
But if you're small enough and eat it, then it's poison.
This, this is unsolicited, but if we were to put even a fraction of that 50 to 75 for just, cause really we've established a recycling center, and we advertise to a very, very small degree, but the city's never undertaken any kind of education of the public in general. This was something that Joan and others we were discussing in our recent work study session, that a very comprehensive outreach program to citizens. So there is another opportunity, so that it's not just about a plastic bag, but it's about, you know, the entire environmental issue. So that could be something else to consider, to set money aside specifically for trying to change behaviors. And we might see a different attitude in how people, you know,
Yeah,
make choices.
It's kind of like someone had said, whether you're using plastic or you're using paper. If you're using paper, then you're having an impact on the trees that are being used. Also, I believe that someone at one time told us that paper was more expensive, so I could see an increased cost at the register to the customer because of the paper bags. So, and we don't know what that would actually be, so
But
there are trade-offs.
everything costs money. I mean, you know, those boxes that come from Amazon incessantly, every day, with its tons of styrofoam and all that cardboard. I mean, I'm sure Amazon gets a nice rate on it, but we're paying for it. And I would ask the question, what does it say about our community if we were the first in the state? Well, what type of companies might you attract to Salina then? It just depends on, you know, how we're trying to paint ourselves.
Well,
But, you know, in medicine, there are two risks. The risk of having an operation and the risk of not having an operation. And we very often look at the risk of doing something and forget about the risk of not doing something. And, yeah, we're still a little small, but somebody's gonna have to step up, and I don't see why it can't be us.
True.
I'm not saying spend the whole 400,000, whatever it be, 1 year, but I mean, we'll probably spend the first year just putting our feet in the water to see how cold it is anyway. And we might then find out, okay, let's try something.
we are much higher than average in terms of our trash disposed of per pound per capita, correct? I mean, aren't we one of the highest in the state,
About a pound per person.
higher than the state average?
But the KDHE has told me on multiple occasions that they believe that is due to the regional manufacturing hub of Salina, rather than, because it's all solid waste generated within Saline County. So,
It's not just
Commercial, industrial.
Correct.
It's not just residential,
Correct.
okay.
That pound was per day, what time period?
pounds per person per day.
Great.
And we're about a pound more than the
what's the
Kansas
average?
average.
What is the average?
I mean, really rough, it would be the difference between 4 pounds per person per day and 5 pounds per person per day. That's not the exact number, but that would be well within the ballpark.
So our body weight, assuming we 150 pounds, would be, our everybody.
No, 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 no.
Some
Some of us a little more than that.
The fictitious 70 kg man, so that's our body weight every month in trash. That's obscene. I mean,
But that is also counting Exide and, all the big players in
yeah, well, theirs is worse. I mean, theirs has real bad chemicals in it.
Not to single them out,
But I
but I
think,
just meant a large.
the fallacy in that statistic is you may be comparing an average in a community that's just residents or minimal manufacturing. You know, we have manufacturers that, everything from Schwann's to Exide that have industrial waste.
I did ask KDHE's environmental scientists to look at it and see if they could find anything, and they really, he's the former head of the Bureau of Waste Management, but he did say that he did not think it was related to some anomaly that we're throwing away more. It has more to do with the manufacturing and other things.
I just do my own neighborhood, but Thursday morning, there's a whole lot of bags sitting on the ground next to that trash can. I think if we go automated, folks are gonna need more. They're gonna need more than one trash can because there's no way in the world all this stuff's gonna fit into one trash can.
Probably
I think you're right. I think there will be a motivation to.
Yeah, they'll change their habits.
Yeah, change habits somehow. Because of that.
Well, or worse,
Or
stuff
change
gets left on the
providers.
ground.
Probably the only other
Or
thing
change trash
I
haulers.
want to say is, Lauren and Jim, I appreciate the time that you guys put in on this, I really do. I do respect my fellow commissioners' points, and, it's whatever we decide, or whatever they decide, I'll support them.
And I'll say one thing. Next time a high school student comes, like, can you help me with a project? Well, have you done all of this first? Don't come talk to me until you've done. Till you've done the Driscoll steps, don't come.
It's actually not beef Kembach, but highly watered down, but.
So if I can recap, what I heard is interest in looking at our own operations internally and what we can do in the way of education efforts to try to get the word out on the alternatives and the harm of it.
How, is there a skinny version of this that could be done similar to what's been done for the river or the early downtown?
I think it's been how much on the river? 400,000?
Well,
but
yeah,
that was,
maybe
that
that's,
was the
yeah,
master
lots
plan.
more skinny than that.
So, but are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean.
Right, well, no, just to gauge public opinion. Right.
You can. I mean, you could put a couple floaters out there. I mean, I can take where you have 5 stakeholder meetings or business interviews, and I can bring it down to 3. But what I would say is, like, as you skinny that, you also skinny the data that gives you that true feedback that you need.
Well, and my concern is what Lauren's described is a conversation. And so if you skinny it up too much, or if you go to survey, you get people jumping to conclusions about straws and all the other things we're seeing in the media compared to what we might have in mind. We really have to be
What'll happen is you'll
specific.
get a survey like we did on recycling. I want it, but I don't want to pay for it. I want it, but I don't want to have to pay for my paper. I don't want, we had, instead of having 1 or 2 answers, we had, it was like shooting the shotgun at the wall. We had answers all over the place. I think that's what you'll see with this too. I'm not sure how much direction you get sometimes, because you get 50 people in a room, and all of a sudden we've got 50 different answers,
I'd like to ask a favor, since we haven't got to the point of televising our study sessions yet, which we probably discussed, if you could do what you just did in a controlled studio environment with the slides and put it on, you'd know where to put it on our
between our website and Access TV.
so that people can see it, and we just absorb comments over the next couple of weeks and then come back in about 3 weeks and discuss it.
I'd still like to see, though, if we could take a look and find out about accepting, or, if we can find out what to do with and accept the plastic bags at the recycle center, because I got a feeling you're gonna get a bunch of them if they.
Even if they were put into a hermetically sealed box which went into the landfill, at least they wouldn't be blowing all around. They would be in one box.
It's a behavioral change we have to motivate somehow.
people motivated by,
But I got a few
Money
connections out
or
there too, I'll make some
black
phone calls
money.
too, I mean, somebody knows where those plastic bags go. I mean, it can't be that, it can't be a national secret. So, I mean, you know, somebody
you
knows
found
where
the
they go.
no,
Yeah.
you all did the right thing, you started at the top.
So what I hear you saying is,
We'll be in the middle.
Mayor, what I hear you saying is an interest in some way, seeing if we can engage public input, or public receptivity to the idea.
Well, we put some bait out in the water, I just let people bite at it for a couple of weeks.
So, I mean, what we could do is, I mean,
But
we're
it'd be
going
nice
to
to-
do some kind of video, and then people can just submit comments.
Yeah, I mean,
We've heard
if this
experts, do we have
presentation could be,
consensus? And
I mean, that would be
but,
my idea, I mean, because let's face it, this, our only outlet to the world for this presentation right now. Is basically, if we could, I mean, if this could be put where people can see it.
Yeah,
And that's good, but I don't know how strong it would have to be for me to change my opinion of staff time and dollars being spent. You know?
I'm in that same
I mean, it's kind of,
boat as the water.
if it's 60-40, that doesn't do it. If it's 99-1%, you know, or 90-10, maybe I have to rethink be receptive to the individuals, to the community, but I don't probably see that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same.
Well, we
same
would have
position.
placed the slides on our website anyway. To add a presentation with it, I don't think is a big deal, to make comments.
So put,
Well,
I understand it.
Well, there's a very professional sounding voice narrating someone through the slides.
yeah, part of my concern though is this is directed at you as the audience of what it would take to help facilitate you as a bag van. I'm not sure the end user, they're going to want to know what the band's going to look like and what does it mean for me as the end user, which we haven't really touched on that. We're saying we're going to figure that out.
We couldn't leave the room for 30 minutes. I'm not sure anybody's listening to Lauren for 30 minutes on. I mean, seriously.
My 8-year-old.
I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm sitting there going, okay, 10 minutes into this. I mean,
Well, I think
it'd have to be a
Some
shorter
animation?
version, yeah.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
well, people who own stores, you know, whose livelihood will be affected by this, take the time. I mean, I'm assuming reasonably intelligent folks if they're running retail operations. I mean, I don't think this is going to be above them at all. I mean, they're going to be a big stakeholder. I think anything coming out right now, they would want to be up on early in the game.
Just as a matter of practice, the PowerPoint itself will be out there.
It will.
We can certainly do that. I guess I'm looking for consensus from you as a group, how you want us to proceed on this.
It could be highlighted on the main page too. I mean, without having Lauren have to do her production or whatever. And you know, I like that transparency, and I think it's great to have it available for people to take a look at, and if they want to weigh in, they can, but at the same time, just in light of what I've seen today, I'm just not looking to move forward with it at this time, so I think Commissioner Hoppett said it very well. I don't know what it would take, you know, a 90-10 split, hearing from, 20,000 people. Yeah, maybe I'm gonna need to reevaluate, how I personally have prioritized things that we're doing within the city versus, switching some of those out for this plastic bag ban, so.
But the only one we've heard of from so far right now is ourselves and maybe 5 people each outside of this room.
Well, we can-
Comments.
We can do some more research as far as a place to take them, because Jim's done an excellent job down at the SDRC of coming up with the solution for shredded paper and aluminum foil, the things that we're collecting separately. Plastic bags don't take a lot of space. If we were able to collect them and take them somewhere, we will do what we can to get some more information on that for sure. Thank you.
Just procedural, I'm gonna just go to public comment. We need to actually get out of here at 3:55. I'm assuming there's some adjustments there, or additions, just
For the agenda?
and not even want to be talking early, but just,
Yeah, but I think we'll need to call the meeting to order and then do those, so we'll,
right.
I think we'll.
There may be two or three that got changed.
Oh, well, yeah, there is a highlighted copy of the agenda if you want to read that before the meeting gets called over.
Any hot issues?
Can we do a public comment about what you've just been talking about?
Yep.
If that's okay with you? I would like to make a comment. I think you're making assumptions that people think that trash is a problem. And from working with friends, I think you're making a wrong assumption. I don't think people are educated enough to understand the immense problems that are happening in the environment. And I beg of you, if you do nothing else, is to try to help fund some education for people to understand why plastics are bad and what is happening to their environment. I do think it is a real problem, and to think that we're not part of the ocean plastic is not understanding that water runs, it doesn't stay in one place. And I'm sure there's plastic from Salina, Kansas in the Gulf of Mexico because it's hitting the Mississippi. We are part of that problem, and it would be lovely if you would take the initiative, even if it's, if you could give a spare dime to some kind of help for the recycling center to do more than just collecting recycle, because there's a certain amount of the population that are going to recycle, but I'm guessing there's a huge amount of the population that really doesn't understand that at all, or why they should do that. And that, if you could just help us to give some attention to that, we would be most grateful. You're going to have a river running through this community in just a few years, and there's a plastic problem in your riverways, in everybody's riverways. It's not just here. And coming through your storm drains, it floats, and you can see plastic bags in the trees. You are not going to escape your problems if you devote all your energy to housing. You still have that problem. We're all facing that, and I do believe people will change behavior if they begin to understand why. But it can't be so complicated they can't grasp what they should do. It has to be so simple that they can take an action. And what I found, if you make the action very simple, it gives them hope that they can make change. And that is what needs to happen, I believe. Are you? I just think it has to be real simple. Putting that up is not going to change people's opinion on what to do. It has to be very simple, and that they can make a difference in their own environment and why they would do that, because it's affecting them personally. Once people understand that, they will make change. Because I always make it about, this is your river, this is your drinking water, and then you start seeing people want to throw up, because that becomes personal. And if you make it personal to people, they will change their behavior. I really believe that. I don't think it's hopeless, but I do think we need to take a stand, and it would be great if Salina would at least make a stand in education, and that it's important enough to be open to be speaking about it. So thank you.
So I will just say that I do plan to combine the audio and the video that I've recorded from today's meeting, and should probably have a finished version of that product sometime tomorrow. And if you guys want to use it in any capacity, you're welcome to do so.
Send me a link to it.
Yeah, will do.
Incorporate it. Thanks, Jason.
Anyone else?
I just want to underscore what James said. That really well said. I think the way I see this issue is that people aren't being educated in an intentional way. If that was happening, we wouldn't have the huge piles of trash on trash day at the curb, for instance. And we wouldn't have people throwing their bottles and things out the window. It's pretty basic. And I wonder if when we try to do things that we are doing the most efficient way possible, the least cost possible, the fewest staff possible, I wonder sometimes if we aren't overdoing that to the point where we don't have the people to make progress and innovate and do things in a better way. I think a lot of people in our community recognize that in some ways Salina, progressive city that it is way behind the norm in some areas, and how we handle our refuse, I think, is one of them. So education. We haven't been doing it. We need to get started.